The ice is black. A man is trapped under the frozen water. He looks at me, but I stay silent. Needle Lake gives you hope when you feel different, helps you understand secrets in your life, and makes you interesting to all your friends. Keep watching this summary right now and read this book yourself.
The air up there in the Alpine zone, it doesn't just feel cold to you, it
Right.
feels absolute.
It's totally unforgiving.
Yeah. You step out of the montane rainforest, out from beneath that suffocating canopy of ancient moss-draped red cedars, and you hit this boundary line where the snow begins.
And the moisture in the air just crystallizes.
Exactly. It crystallizes. It's quiet in a way that feels heavy, like it actively presses against your eardrums.
And then you reach the edge of Needle Lake. It's Christmas Eve.
The dead of winter.
Yeah. And there is this shining black slick of ice, stretching perfectly, smoothly, flawlessly, all the way to the far shore.
Just total glass.
Total glass.
Yeah.
You know, flurries of snow are turning to mist in the air before they even touch the surface. The sky above is the color of wet iron.
And you're standing on the wooden dock, 8 feet above that black glass. The wood is rotting underneath your boots, slick with frost.
The rock is heavy in your hands.
So heavy. It's rough.
No.
Cold. It bites into the soft skin of your palms, and you heave it over the edge. It falls through the freezing air.
And there is a sickening thud,
Just a terrible thud.
followed by the creak, that high-pitched, agonizing groan of the ice splitting.
It sounds like a bone snapping in a silent room.
Yeah, fissures spiderwebbing outward, fracturing the reflection of the gray sky into these jagged shards, and then another rock falls.
And the structural integrity fails entirely.
Right.
The ice gives way. A dark hole of rippling, freezing water opens up like a mouth.
And then there is Tom.
Right, Tom.
He steps backward, he slips. The ice shatters beneath his weight with a concussive crunch. Suddenly, he is chin-deep in the water.
The shock of the cold paralyzes his diaphragm.
Instantly, he is gasping at the surface, reaching frantically toward the gray sky, his fingers just scrambling for purchase on the jagged edges of the hole he just created.
And every microscopic sound is amplified in that gruesome, freezing stillness.
Yeah, the wet gurgle rising from his throat as the water breaches his mouth. The desperate animal thrashing of his arms breaking more ice.
Peeling the skin from his knuckles.
Exactly. Sealing his own fate with every panicked movement. And then the sudden gust of wind howling through the snow-capped pines, just drowning out his final choked plea.
He grows stiff. I mean, the human body cannot sustain core temperature in water that cold.
No, it takes the heat from his blood in a matter of seconds.
The frantic thrashing slows to a twitch. He stops fighting the ice. He lets go of the edge.
And for a few agonizing moments, he just floats there, upright, spinning slowly like a discarded buoy.
His eyes are wide open, still blinking.
And then he sinks, slipping slowly below the surface, fading into the blue quiet, down past the frozen, tangled ropes of pondweed.
Down through the stargrass.
Down into the deep, dark silt where the snapping turtles sleep in the mud. The water ripples once, twice.
And then the freezing surface begins to settle. The quiet returns.
Yeah, the quiet returns.
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive into an uncorrected proof of Justine Champion's Needle Lake.
We're here to trace a specific, agonizing trajectory today.
Yeah, we're looking at how a narrative that presents itself as a quiet, atmospheric, coming-of-age story in the Pacific Northwest devolves, deliberately and ruthlessly, into a suffocating psychological noir.
We are looking at the exact anatomy of dread. How an environment, both the physical dampness of the geography and the psychological isolation of the people, can construct a cage so perfectly suited to its occupant,
Right.
to the point that they do not even realize the door is locked until the water is rising over their head.
But, there's a fundamental flaw in the way this narrative expects us to view its protagonist. We are trapped in the mind of Ida.
Right, our 14-year-old narrator.
A 14-year-old girl who stands on that rotting wooden dock, watches a man drown in freezing water, and does absolutely nothing.
Right.
I mean, she is entirely passive. She is a willing, stationary witness to her cousin Elna's chaotic, escalating violence.
Well, I think that's a really hard read on her.
The narrative frames Ida as a victim of her sensory environment, sure. But empirically, we have to question the sheer magnitude of this passivity. I think we do. She uses her neurodivergence, her sensory overload, as an aesthetic shield against participating in her own life. She completely refuses agency.
I have to stop you there, because you're applying A neurotypical standard of agency to a girl whose nervous system is literally on fire.
On fire is a strong term.
But it's accurate. Ida isn't using anything as a shield. She is surviving a world that assaults her at the cellular level every waking second. To call her passive is to entirely misunderstand the intense, visceral, inescapable reality of her sensory worldview.
I just struggle with the total lack of action.
But for Ida, simply existing in this setting, simply breathing the air in a classroom, requires a monumental, exhausting expenditure of energy. The tragedy is Needle Lake isn't her passivity. It is the inevitable, violent collision between a girl desperate for profound stillness and a world demanding she perform normalcy.
Okay, well, then we have to examine the specific world demanding that performance. Mineral, Washington.
Right.
A dying logging town on the ragged border of a national forest. Population 1,800.
It is a place defined by heavy, relentless rain, muddy boots, and a profound, inescapable isolation.
The town itself is not just a backdrop. It is a character. It breathes, it rots, it exerts pressure on everyone in it.
Think about the convenience store where Ida and her mother, Anne, live.
Yeah.
It's the ground floor of a two-story building that once housed a local paper, the Mineral Star. Champine spent a lot of time detailing those faded blue letters painted along the side of the building.
With the 5-point stars accentuating the swoops of the S.
Yes, that detail matters. It is a lingering ghost of a time when the town had a voice, when it had a documented existence and a purpose. Now it's just fading paint peeling off damp wood, a forgotten archive.
And the sensory texture of this decay is inescapable. The smell of pine sap and stale sweat embedded deep into the loggers' mended clothes.
The 20-pound plastic jugs of laundry detergent hauled down into the dark basement.
The single rusted gas pump out front, standing like a lonely sentinel. And always looming on the horizon, the stark, jagged, indifferent presence of Mount Baker draped in heavy snow.
It is the absolute epitome of Pacific Northwest Gothic.
It really is. And to understand the weight of that Gothic atmosphere, you have to contextualize the era. The book is explicitly set in 1996.
Right. This is the era of pre-digital isolation.
Exactly. The Pacific Northwest, during this specific window of the mid-90s, bred a very particular kind of cultural despair and feral independence.
You can really feel the influence of the grunge movement seeping through the floorboards.
Oh, totally. The atmospheric, suffocating weight of an album like Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies, the heavy, damp, isolating reality of the woods.
Because in 1996, in Mineral, Washington, there is no internet to escape into. There are no glowing screens to connect you to a broader world. The gloom isn't just weather. It is an entire emotional ecosystem.
Which brings us to Patrick, the neighbor who was unceremoniously kicked out of the military. He calls Mineral a pockmark.
He literally spits the word out on the porch.
Yeah, thrusting his fist as if trying to physically punch the town into another dimension. Pockmark. That is a highly specific, loaded term.
It's a scar from a disease.
Exactly. It's a localized area of decay on an otherwise healthy body. But I argue that this beautifully rendered pockmark of a town functions as an aesthetic alibi for Ida.
An alibi.
Yes. She wraps herself in the suffocating gloom of Mineral so she doesn't have to engage. The town is depressed, so she is allowed to be vacant. She uses the geography to justify her own blankness.
I mean, you view it as an alibi. I view it as a mirror.
How so?
In Mineral, the environment doesn't just surround you, it digests you. Ida has a literal diagnosed hole in her heart, an atrial septal defect.
Right.
The town is a geographic manifestation of that physiological defect. The dampness, the isolation, the rotting timber, it exerts a crushing atmospheric weight that perfectly symmetrically matches her internal void. She isn't hiding behind the town is actively consuming her.
Well, let's look at the mechanics of how she navigates that consumption then. She survives by creating these rigidly controlled, obsessive sensory sanctuaries.
Like the geography obsession.
Yes. She won a $500 municipal bond in the 1996 Junior State Geography Bee because a boy from Tacoma mislabeled Sikkim as part of Bhutan.
She knows, without hesitation, that there are exactly 7,641 islands in the Philippines.
7,641. Not a rough estimate, an absolute fixed integer.
Because the geography is a required coping mechanism. It is the only antidote to the physical agony she experiences in daily life.
When she's at school, the ambient noise of teenagers talking in the hallway is described as dental drills against her skull.
God, yeah. The painful, vibrating hum of the fluorescent lights, the sheer physical torment of the seams on her socks rubbing against her toes, The world is a cacophony of painful friction.
But when she closes her eyes and recites the alphabetical list of countries and their capitals, she describes it as feeling like her brain is being slowly submerged into a warm bath.
Maps are predictable. Borders are drawn clearly in black ink. The Philippines will always have 7,641 islands. It requires nothing of her but memorization.
And when the maps aren't enough, there is the breath-holding.
Right. Sneaking out to the dock at Needle Lake in the early summer mornings before anyone is awake.
The precise moment her body slices through the water's surface, the painful noise of the world muffles into a soft blue quiet. The friction just vanishes.
96 seconds on average. Once, she puts it to 101 seconds.
101 seconds of total biological suspension.
It is a literal escape from the physical gravity of the Earth. And more importantly, a metaphorical escape from the crushing societal expectations of her waking life.
Dr. Fields, the local pediatrician with his milky blue eyes and his icy stethoscope, constantly tells her to limit exertion because of her heart defect.
No cannonballs, no flinging herself around, no running too fast.
But underwater, in that blue quiet, she is utterly weightless. She cannot hear his droning croak. She is free from the exhausting, relentless demands of being a teenage girl in a world that views her as a square peg.
But that controlled, silent sanctuary they carefully maintained circuit board is completely obliterated the exact moment Elna arrives.
Elna. Mid-December. Sleet hammering against the windows. The bells on the front door of the convenience store rattle.
The narrative zooms in to the molecular level for Elna's entrance, and it is entirely jarring against the mud of mineral.
A tall, slim, red-headed girl in a mint green winter coat.
2 green duffel bags, silver winter boots that catch the fluorescent light.
Pearlescent pink nails, filed meticulously into slender ovals, rhinestone rings on her fingers, a shiny gold charm bracelet clinking against her wrist.
Star-shaped earrings with purple crystals. She prowls between the dusty shelves of canned beans and motor oil like a panther dropped into a wholly inadequate enclosure.
It is the feral glamour of Elna. She brings the sharp, jagged, terrifying edge of the outside world directly into Ida's quiet, damp terrarium.
We learn very quickly that Elna grew up in the dressing rooms of San Francisco drag clubs.
Yeah, she spent her childhood watching drag queens apply heavy stage makeup, hiding behind racks of sequins from her mother Candace's cyclical, violent pill addiction.
By the time Elna was 12 years old, she was the one filling out her mother's court-mandated sobriety checklists. She knows exactly how to manipulate desperate people effortlessly.
Within days of arriving in this dying logging town, she starts a mending business for the loggers, charming them, extracting their money.
She is pure survivalist sociopathy wrapped in a glittery butterfly sweater.
And this is exactly where the logic of Ida's victimhood falls apart for me.
Why?
I look at Ida as a faulty circuit board that simply shuts down under pressure. She is hyper-observant. She immediately recognizes Elna's capacity for deceit. She stands right there and watches Elna steal $20 from the cash register almost the moment she arrives.
Yeah.
But instead of pulling away, instead of warning Anne, she leans in. This is a deeply toxic, deeply unreliable bond. Ida isn't an innocent bystander paralyzed by fear. She becomes a willing, complicit hostage to Elna's chaos because submitting to Elna is easier than standing on her own 2 feet.
To call her a willing hostage completely ignores the profound, crushing isolation of Ida's existence up to that point.
Does it?
Yes. For a girl who has spent her entire 14 years painfully observing the invisible fence that ran down the center of girlhood, knowing she is on the outside of it, Elna is a revelation.
A dangerous one.
Sure, but think about what every adult in Ida's life demands of her. They demand that she be mild, that she be a fawn, yielding, silent, endlessly, painfully tolerant of her own discomfort.
They just want her to be safe.
They punish her for her neurodivergence by demanding she mask it. But Elna doesn't demand she be a fawn. Elna paints her eyelashes with dark mascara, gives her stolen mood rings, and looks at the world with the exact same cold, detached cynicism that Ida feels internally.
So Elna validates her.
Exactly. Elna's sociopathy isn't just chaos. It is a tragic but deeply necessary armor for a girl like Ida. Elna's the only person who looks at the square peg and doesn't immediately try to sand down the edges.
Okay, well, let's trace how that armor becomes a weapon. We have to look at the mechanics of the dread. The escalation doesn't start with the lake. It starts small.
The lock-picking scene.
Right. Elna decides she needs to get into Tom's room. Tom, the boarder who rents the room upstairs. The man with the unsteady gait, the scraggly blonde hair, the lingering smell of damp earth.
Elna uses a simple bobby pin and a heavy rubber flashlight stolen from the junk drawer downstairs.
The agonizing tension of that scene is palpable. The sheer violation of crossing a locked threshold. Ida doesn't want to go in. Her body physically rejects the action.
She describes her legs feeling heavy, like wading through mud, a visceral symptom of her nervous system beginning to overload.
And what they actually find inside that room perfectly encapsulates the horror of Champine's narrative. It's the duality of it.
Right, because Elna is ruthlessly rifling through the kitchenette, tearing open cardboard boxes of dry pasta, desperately hunting for Tom's painkillers.
But Ida's focus is drawn away from the search. She looks at the futon. She finds a hand-crochet blanket, zigzagging stripes of mustard, yellow-brown, and pale orange yarn.
It's frayed at the edges. It smells faintly of stale beer and old damp laundry.
It's the profound, undeniable sadness of that physical object. In that moment, Ida realizes that someone, a mother, a grandmother, someone who cared, spent hours making that specific blanket for Tom.
That he has carried this fragile artifact of childhood love through years of a broken, transient, struggling life. It humanizes him instantly for Ida. It makes him real.
And right next to that quiet, heartbreaking realization is Elna, triumphant, finding the orange plastic pill bottles hidden inside a stale cereal box.
The stark innocence of the hand-crocheted blanket contrasted violently with the stolen narcotics.
But we cannot skip over the connective tissue here. The mechanism of how this discovery leads to the ice. They steal the pills. Tom realizes they are missing.
But he can't go to Anne because he's not supposed to have them.
Exactly. He confronts Elna, and Elna, with the cold precision of a sociopath, blackmails him.
She threatens to expose his addiction to Anne.
To get him kicked out onto the street in the dead of winter, or worse, to call the police and tell them he tried to touch them. She spins a web that corners a desperate, unstable man. She strips him of his options.
She backs a wild animal into a corner. And a cornered animal doesn't negotiate.
Which brings us back to the dock. Christmas Eve, the Fawn response. We need to dissect the actual physiological mechanism of this moment. Tom walks out onto the ice.
He has realized the blackmail will never end. He is angry, he is erratic, withdrawing from the pills.
And he has a loop of braided, galvanized steel cable tucked into his jeans, the heavy industrial kind used on the iron jaws of a logging skidder.
He is a direct, immediate, lethal, physical threat.
Elna readies herself to fight. She picks up the rocks. But Ida is paralyzed. Her feet feel chemically bound to the wooden dock. Her arms go entirely numb. She cannot run. She cannot open her mouth to scream.
Because in trauma psychology, we are all familiar with fight, flight, or freeze. But Fawn is the lesser discussed, profoundly misunderstood fourth response. And it is entirely neurological. When the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, perceives a lethal threat, it rapidly calculates survival odds. For a neurodivergent child who has been bullied, marginalized, and physically overpowered her entire life, the brain instantly recognizes that fight will fail and flight is impossible.
So the nervous system completely hijacks the motor functions.
Yes, it initiates a physiological lockup designed to submit to the predator, to appease the aggressor, and minimize the physical damage of the inevitable attack. Ida has been conditioned her entire life to be the Fawn.
To sit quietly in the counselor's office.
To go completely limp when kids smash her face into the muddy, ribbed rubber floor of the school bus so they get bored faster.
When Tom approaches with the steel cable, her neurological wiring simply does not offer run or fight as options on the menu.
Exactly. The circuit board doesn't shut down out of malice. It locks her in a physical paralysis of observation to keep her alive. She becomes a silent witness because her brain believes silence equals survival.
But I keep coming back to Lenz's law. This is the memory Ida has earlier in the book of Jen, her mother's girlfriend, showing her a physics experiment in the backyard under the dripping big leaf maple tree. It is the thematic anchor of her entire intellect.
The copper tube experiment.
Yeah. You take a hollow copper or aluminum tube, you drop a stack of heavy circular neodymium magnets down the center. You expect them to plummet to the ground.
But as the magnets fall, their moving magnetic field interacts with the conductive metal of the tube. It causes the surrounding metal to produce an electrical current, an eddy current.
Which in turn creates its own opposing magnetic field, a field strong enough to physically push back against the motion of the falling magnets.
They don't free fall. They spin lazily, slowly, falling as if suspended in molasses. A little fight against gravity going on in there, Jen tells her.
It is the central, unavoidable metaphor of the entire book, that invisible electrical current fighting gravity. It represents Ida's internal resistance to the crushing weight of her reality.
But it also represents the unspoken family secrets fighting to stay hidden. the truth falling slowly, inevitably, through the dark, suffocating tube of their lives.
So this brings us to the core of my frustration with Ida's culpability. I need logical consistency.
Okay.
If she is so hyper-observant, if she understands the complex physical mechanics of Lenz's law, if she can memorize the tectonic plates of the Pacific Islands and count the 7,641 landmasses, how could she not foresee the catastrophic violence Elna was capable of? How could she not calculate the trajectory of the blackmail?
This raises a deeply uncomfortable question about the difference between desire and foresight.
Meaning?
I argue she did sense the darkness. The threat wasn't invisible to her, but she craved the disruption.
Craved it.
The gravity of her life in Mineral, the isolation, the sensory torture of the school, the smothering, disappointed sighs of her mother, Anne, was pulling her down into the mud. She was in a freefall of depression.
So Elna was the magnet.
Elna was the opposing magnetic field. The violence, the chaos, the blackmail. It was the only eddy current strong enough to break the gravity of Ida's predetermined, rotting life. She didn't consciously foresee the murder on the ice, but she willingly surrendered to the current that led to it, because anything was better than hitting the ground.
The current that ultimately pulls him into Patrick's stolen car, fleeing down the coast in the dead of night, with Tom rotting at the bottom of the lake.
The escape. It is a masterclass in sensory exhaustion.
The hypnotic, vibrating hum of the tires against the wet asphalt.
Elna tearing up Patrick's vehicle registration into tiny confetti and throwing the pieces out the window into the black wind. Driving past desolate, jagged coastlines and half-deserted forest towns that look like darker reflections of Mineral.
And then they cross the border into California. They hit Eureka.
The motel room with the thick, matted green carpeting.
And the overwhelming smell of hot laundry detergent wafting up from the basement vents, stinging their exhausted eyes.
But before they reach the safety of the motel, there's the encounter outside the tavern. Sadie's.
The flickering neon sign buzzing in the damp air. The woman standing outside. She is missing teeth. She has yellow, brittle braids secured by cheap, different-colored rubber bands.
She asks Elna for a light. Elna, radiating her usual untouchable confidence, produces a lighter. But the woman doesn't take it.
She steps back. She looks at Elna, really looks at her, and delivers a line with plain, unemotional, terrifying steadiness. There's something very dark in you.
It's the oracle on the road, the warning from the Greek chorus.
And Elna's reaction is the tell. Her voice wavers. The rhinestone armor cracks for just a fraction of a second. She is rattled.
But they keep driving. Over the Golden Gate Bridge, bathed in artificial purple light and heavy rolling fog.
The yellow emergency telephone bolted to the guardrail reading "There is hope" in stark black letters into San Francisco.
The revelation of the family secret awaits them in Candace's apartment. We have to sit in the suffocating sensory reality of this room.
It is a direct assault on Ida's finely tuned nervous system. The little vestibule is thick with sweet-smelling, choking smoke from cheap orange incense cones.
But the incense is masking something. There is a fetid smell lurking beneath it, like a piece of meat left out in the sun, rotting quietly in a corner.
A crusty plastic takeout fork snapped in half on the linoleum floor. And Candace, reclined on a faded green velvet sofa, wearing a dirty pink terry cloth robe, surrounded by a fortress of empty orange prescription bottles.
And the physical mirroring, the biological, undeniable truth. Candace's feet are resting on the end of the sofa. She has lime green toenails.
But the structure of the foot, narrow, knobby feet. The third toe is noticeably longer than the others. Sharp, prominent ankles, unusually high arches.
Ida looks at those feet, feeling the room tilt, feeling dizzy, realizing with absolute physical certainty that they match her own feet exactly.
The truth finally drops through the copper tube. It hits the floor. Candace is not her aunt. Candace is her biological mother.
And the quiet, disappointed woman who raised her in the damp back room of the convenience store in Mineral is her aunt.
Here's where I have to push back hard against the adults in this narrative. The sheer unforgivable cowardice of it.
Coward.
Yes. Ida tries to process this monumental betrayal using the law of parsimony. Occam's razor. The scientific principle that the simplest explanation, the one requiring the fewest assumptions, is almost always the most reliable. She tries to logically, empirically disprove Elna's claim. She looks at Candace and says, what makes more sense? That Anne had a brief fling with a mystery man who moved to Calgary, as she was always told? Or that Candace got accidentally pregnant, gave the baby to her sister, and everyone conspired to lie to a child for 14 consecutive years?
Well, obviously the lie sounds more complicated.
Parsimony dictates that the lie is simply the path of least resistance for the mothers. It was easier to lie to a neurodivergent child than to deal with the messy, legal, and social reality of their own choices.
That's entirely unfair to Anne.
Anne didn't want the confrontation of adopting a child from an addict. Candace didn't want the suffocating responsibility of raising a disabled daughter. It is an unforgivable betrayal of a vulnerable girl. They built her entire reality, her entire sense of self, on a foundation of rot.
You are applying cold, rigid, empirical logic to a situation born of desperate, agonizing, chaotic emotion.
It's the only logical conclusion.
To understand this, we have to look at the history of core ice sampling. Earlier in the book, Candace tells Ida a seemingly random story about a boy from high school who grew up to study ancient ice in Antarctica.
Drilling massive, hollow metal tubes deep into the frozen layers of the Earth to extract cylinders of ice.
Yes. Those cylinders reveal microscopic air bubbles, traces of volcanic eruptions, and weather patterns from millions of years ago. Ida is forced to be that core ice sampler in this apartment. She is drilling down into the deep, frozen, violently hidden layers of her own family trauma to understand her present.
I understand the metaphor, but the ice reveals a lie.
And what she finds in that ice isn't malice. It is raw survival. Think about the grim reality of addiction in the late 1980s and early 90s.
Candace was drowning in pills.
She was entirely non-functional. She confesses on that green velvet sofa that when Ida was a tiny baby, Elna, who's just a neglected toddler herself, was wildly, dangerously jealous. Candace walked into the bathroom and found toddler Elna holding baby Ida's head underwater in the bathtub. Candace didn't take Ida to the hospital. She couldn't. She was terrified child services would arrest her and take both her children into the foster system.
So she gave her away.
The lie wasn't malicious. Giving Ida to Anne wasn't an abdication of responsibility. It was a desperate, imperfect, agonizing act of love to save a child from a chaotic, lethal environment. The lie was the only armor Anne had to protect Ida from the feral reality of her biological mother.
But the feral reality catches up to her anyway. The armor fails. It brings us to the roof.
The climax. The flat, tar paper roof of the apartment building in San Francisco.
Let's examine the exact parameters of the scene. A dim, flickering, bluish glow from a single security floodlight. A dingy, shallow pool of trapped rainwater near the skipper drain.
A broken patio umbrella flapping violently in the wind. A plastic bag of cheap weed left open on a rusted lawn chair.
The deep, vibrating foghorn sounding in the distance from the Golden Gate Bridge, which now looks like it's made of smoldering, gilt embers through the mist.
The psychological tension here is unbearable. Elna has forced Ida to smoke marijuana, further destabilizing her already fragile, overloaded sensory equilibrium.
Ida's heart, her literally defective heart, is racing dangerously fast. She feels detached from her body. She describes her hands feeling like big, clumsy cartoon gloves.
The extreme cottonmouth, the spinning dizziness. And Elna is pushing her, mocking her, pacing around the wet roof, thoroughly enjoying the total destruction of Ida's reality.
And this is the breaking point. The moment the circuit board finally overloads and fires back.
Yeah.
Ida weaponizes her anger. She takes the agonizing pain of the core ice revelation and turns it into a blade. She looks at Elna, standing near the edge of the roof, and says, "Candace told me she always wished she'd sent you away instead, that she kept the wrong daughter."
The silence that follows that line. The wind flapping Elna's wet t-shirt against her skin. The total collapse of Elna's grand, untouchable illusion.
And then the charge. Elna turns on her heel and breaks into a full sprint toward Ida.
It's described in agonizing slow motion. Her red hair whipping around her pale face, green eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated rage, her teeth gleaming in the blue floodlight.
Ida experiences a massive sympathetic nervous system overload, a total blackout. The high-pitched ringing in her ears drowns out the wind. She closes her eyes, and when she finally opens them...
Elna is gone.
Right.
Ida creeps to the low parapet. She looks over the edge of the roof. Elna is splayed out on the concrete sidewalk 4 stories below.
Her arms and legs are twisted at impossible broken angles.
A dark, blackish puddle of blood blooming slowly around her head like a halo under the street lamp. Her face is staring up at the sky, serene, like she's finally sleeping.
I have to interject here because we must be entirely logical about the physics of this moment.
What do you mean?
Elna was high on marijuana, severely impairing her motor skills and spatial awareness. It had begun to rain. The tar paper and ceramic roof tiles were visibly wet and incredibly slick.
Okay, but...
She was wearing heavy, clumsy silver platform boots. She was acting erratically, running in a blind emotional rage toward a girl standing near the edge of a roof. She slipped.
No.
It is tragic, yes. But it was a clumsy physical accident fueled by teenage hubris and narcotics. The coefficient of friction failed her. Her momentum carried her over the edge. It is empirical.
I cannot accept that. It is far too simple. It completely ignores the crushing psychic weight of the entire narrative up to this exact second.
It's physics.
The fall was not a clumsy structural accident. It was the final, inevitable manifestation of the darkness the lady in Eureka saw outside the Neon Tavern. Elna was a creature of pure destructive chaos.
She just slipped on wet tile.
She picked the lock, she stole the pills, she initiated the blackmail, she threw the rocks at the ice while Palm begged. She was consumed by her own feral gravity.
You are romanticizing a tragic failure of friction, running full speed in platform boots on a wet roof.
And you are stubbornly ignoring the spiritual mechanics of the story. When Ida held up that mirror, when Ida deployed that weaponized, unbearable truth that her mother wished she was the one given away, Elna didn't just slip. The darkness inside her finally pulled her over the edge.
So you think she let herself fall?
She succumbed to the void she had been dancing around her entire life. The eddy current stopped. Gravity won.
Wow.
Yeah.
The epilogue pulls us out of the immediate trauma. Jen, Anne's girlfriend, arrives in San Francisco to collect Ida. They drive back to Mineral.
They stop at a roadside carnival. They ride a rusted Ferris wheel in total deafening silence. They return to the damn convenience store.
The seasons change. In the spring, the heavy ice on Needle Lake finally melts. Tom's bloated, unrecognizable remains wash ashore near the reeds.
The police search his room. They find the remnants of the drugs and the stolen materials. Given his history and the evidence, the death is ruled a tragic, drug-fueled accidental drowning.
The town of Mineral sighs and moves on.
And Ida successfully argues to Anne that she cannot return to the sensory torture of the high school. She is allowed to homeschool herself.
The final image of the book is Ida sitting at her desk in her quiet room, mapping the ocean floor. Surrounded by her atlases, her flags, and her perfectly sharpened colored pencils, drilling back down into her core ice samples.
So we are left with the ultimate thematic question. Did she escape?
Did she?
I argue vehemently that she did. She survived the digestion of Mineral. She survived the lethal, chaotic orbit of Elna.
Escaped. She is trapped.
She found her permanent sanctuary in her maps and her absolute solitude. She is finally free of the societal demands to be a square peg forced into a round hole. She has carved out a microscopic, highly controlled life that accommodates her neurodivergence entirely on her own terms.
She is forever shaped by the boulder tied to a rope resting in her gut. She's entirely complicit in 2 violent deaths.
Complicit is a strong word.
Tom drowning in the freezing water while she watched. Elna falling to the concrete after she deliberately provoked her. She hasn't escaped the Pacific Northwest Gothic. She has permanently internalized it.
She is navigating the only version of the world that makes physiological sense to her. She's surviving.
It is her entire world now.
Yeah.
She is hiding in her room, tracing meaningless lines on paper, desperately avoiding the reality of the blood on her hands.
I think we're just going to have to disagree on that.
I leave you with this final thought, something to ponder in the heavy silence after this audio ends.
Yeah.
If you spend your entire life holding your breath under the blue quiet of the water, if you spend your days studying the deepest, most isolated trenches of the ocean floor, are you mapping the world? Or are you just looking for a place dark enough to hide the things you've done?